This is Masechet Brachot, Daf Yutedim with Bet, and the Gemara is going to address the topic of Kavod Habriyot, the value of human dignity, and in particular when it conflicts with mitzvah of the Torah. On the fourth line of the page, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav says, Hamotze kiloyim bevigdo poshan afilu v'shuk. If a person finds that he's wearing shatnez on his garment, he's wearing wool and linen woven together in his garment, which is prohibited in the Torah called shatnez, and he notices it while he's wearing this shirt or garment. So Rav rules, poshton afilu b'shuk, he's required to remove it, to take it off, even in the middle of the shuk, the marketplace in the street. My timer, what's the reason why the mitzvah extends even to this case, even when it's in a compromise on his dignity? Ein chokhmah, because the pasuk says in Mishlei, Ein chokhmah v'ein tvuna v'ein eitzel l'neged Hashem. There's no one knows better than God. There's no advice or counsel or strategy that's wiser than God. And God said to never, ever, ever wear wool and linen together, never wear shatnez. So we must never do it. And even though there's a circumstance where we think the mitzvah is better off not being kept, we never know better than God. And we never compromise or ignore the mitzvah of the Torah, even in the case of Kavod Habriyot. We're going to skip down a little bit as the Gemara challenges this assertion and this principle. But what the Gemara is going to do is raise a series of Brakhot, which are going to challenge the ruling of Rav. The Brakhot came earlier than Rav. Rav was an early Amora. Here we have, for example, a Brakhot, Tashma. Gadol Kavod Habriyot Shadocha Lo Taseh Shabbat Torah. Kavod Habriyot is so great that it supersedes over a lo taseh in the Torah, a mitzvah lo taseh, a mitzvah d'oraita, to not do something in the Torah. So Kavod Habriyot is more important than such a mitzvah, and it pushes it aside when they come in conflict. That's what the Brakhot teaches. So the Gemara says that this contradicts Rav. Amai, why is this true? Leima, we should say, if Rav is correct, Ein chokhmah v'ein tvuna v'ein eitzel l'neged Hashem. There's no wisdom greater than God. What happened to Rav's principle? Forget the dignity, forget Kavod Habriyot. Follow the mitzvah. Why is it here that Kavod Habriyot overrides the mitzvah lo taseh? Tirgamah Rav Bar Shava, Rav reconciles by interpreting this Brakhot, Kamei Rav Kahana, before Rav Kahana, by saying Balav de lo tasur, that we're referring here in particular to a lo taseh, a very, very specific lo taseh, a lo taseh of lo tasur. Do not deviate, the Torah says, do not deviate from the instructions of the Chacham. This is a mitzvah lo taseh in the Torah, not to ignore the words of the rabbi. So essentially, it's referring to rabbinic law, and it's saying that in the case of rabbinic law, then Kavod Habriyot supersedes the mitzvah. But in a biblical law like shatnez, then we'll maintain the principle that the mitzvah comes before Kavod Habriyot. Achiku alei, they laughed at Rav Bar Shava. Rav lo tasur d'oraitahi. This doesn't make any sense. If we're going to say that Kavod Habriyot overrides lo tasur because it's a lo taseh, so it's d'oraita. So why is it different than shatnez? If lo tasur, the rabbinic law, is actually a mitzvah in the Torah, so how can there be a difference between the importance of lo tasur and of shatnez? And if Kavod Habriyot overrides one, it should override the other equally. Amar Rav Kahana responds, Gavra Rabba Amar Milta lo tachiku alei. If a wise person, Rav Bar Shava, has something to say, don't laugh it off. There might be some wisdom that you're missing. In this case, he's right. Kol milei d'Rabbanan asmechinu alav de lo tasur. The Chachamim hung their hats. They based themselves and their authority on the authority given to them in the Torah in the pasuk of lo tasur. Umishum kvodo sharu rabbanim. The Chachamim themselves built in an exception to the rule and said that if it violates Kavod Habriyot, if it violates human dignity, then we don't legislate our laws, and that's an exception to the rule. And you should better listen to the Kavod Habriyot than our mitzvah. So even though the rabbinic law had the authority of biblical law because of lo tasur, but it was framed differently, and it was built in an exception to the rule of Kavod Habriyot. So this answer is accepted, and the Gemara continues to bring another brayta. Tashma, here we have another brayta referring to the mitzvah of Hashavat Aveda. And in the pasuk, in reference to Hashavat Aveda, we're commanded not only to return lost objects, but also to make sure that if we see one in the street, we don't ignore it, but we pick it up and retrieve it. V'talamto mehem. And the pasuk says it in an awkward way. Don't see a lost object and go out and ignore it. And this phraseology says that there must be cases when you should do actually the positive act of ignoring the object. While there are other cases when we should not ignore it. Okay, so how is it so? What are the cases? There are 3 times we can ignore a lost object. If let's say the finder is a Kohen and he sees a lost object, a person, he sees a lost dog straying in the cemetery, so then the Kohen is not obligated to do the mitzvah of Hashavat Aveda, because the mitzvah to maintain his purity supersedes the mitzvah of Hashavat Aveda, as alluded to in the pasuk of Italamta. Alternatively, another case, Hayazaken ve'ena lefi chvodo. He's an elder person who sees something that it would be beneath his dignity to retrieve, and if it was his own, he also wouldn't retrieve it because he would just let it go. So here also, he sees his friend's object. He's not required to chase after his friend's object. Or thirdly, thirdly is when he will sacrifice more money by taking off time from his work than the value of the object itself. In this case also, the obligation of Hashavat Aveda does not require him to go out of his way to retrieve this object. And this is why it says B'Talamta in the positive that you should positively ignore it, but there are some times that you should ignore it, or you can ignore it. That's the Braita. Amai, the Gemara asks, why is this Braita true? According to Rav Lema, we should say, Ein Chochma v'Ein Tefuna v'Ein Eitel Neged Hashem. What happens to the value of the mitzvah, the ultimate, the overarching value of doing the mitzvah that overrides Kavod Habriyot and mandates that a person take off his shirt in the middle of the street because of shatnez? So the Gemara responds, Shani hatam dichtiva talamta meham. That's true in general, that makes sense. But Hashavat Aveda is an exception to the rule, because Hashavat Aveda has a pasuk to tell us that this is an exception, that sometimes we don't have to do the mitzvah. An exception, we should learn the principle of paradigm from Hashavat Aveda. The principle of Binyan Av tells us that whenever the Torah mandates a rule in one place, it's assumed to be true everywhere. So it should be a Binyan Av, it should be a paradigm that we should always value Kavod Habriyot over a mitzvah like we do in Hashavat Aveda. So the Gemara responds, Isura mimamona lo yalfinan, that there are 2 realms of law: mamon, monetary law, and isur, religious law that's non-monetary. And we can't extend the principles of one to the other. So even though it's true that it's a paradigm that Kavod Habriyot overrides the mitzvah, it's only true, or it can only be extended from Hashavat Aveda to all other monetary responsibilities, but not to mitzvot like shatnez. Okay, now we have a third challenge. Tashma, we have a Braita which relates to Nazir, and quotes the pasuk which has a redundancy, that a Nazir shouldn't become tameh to anyone, and then it singles out his sister also. Mat, his brother, his sister, so each extra word teaches us another halacha. Here we learn, what's the midrash of this pasuk? A person is going on his way to do one of the very important mitzvot of the Torah: shchitas a Pesach, sacrificing his korban Pesach on erev Pesach, or to circumcise his son Brit Milah. And on his way, he gets a call. He hears that his relative sadly passed away. You might think the proper thing to do is to turn around and abandon the mitzvah of Korban Pesach or Brit Milah and go ahead and bury his dead, and he'll miss the mitzvah and he'll miss Korban Pesach for this year because he'll be tameh. Therefore, the Torah says, Lo Yitama, these 2 words by Nazir are extended to this case to tell you, no, don't stop doing the mitzvah. Go finish your mitzvah and then come to the funeral. Yachol, you might mistakenly think, Kashem she'eno mitame lahem, just like you should not become tame to them. Kach eno mitame lemeis mitzvah, so too you should not become tame to a mace mitzvah, as a person who passes and he's the only person available to tend to the burial. He's the only relative. You might think in such a case you should just abandon the dead, the deceased, and go do your mitzvah. Tamaloma v'lachoto. Therefore, the Torah tells us v'lachoto. This extra word, lachoto, who's de'ena matame, and Nazir should not become tame to his sister. Aval, however, mitame hu lemeis mitzvah. But in such an emergency situation, certainly he should abandon the mitzvah, even of Korban Pesach and Brit Milah, mitzvah d'oraita, and preserve the dignity of his relative or this person that passed away and tend to the burial. So thus we see that Kavod Habriyot overrides the mitzvah of the Torah. Amai. So questions the Gemara, why is it so? According to Rav's principle, that we're still maintaining, that mitzvot are paramount. Leima, we should say, ein chachma, ve'ein tvuna, ve'ein eitzel neged Hashem. There's no advice better than God's. God says to do Brit Milah. God says to do Korban Pesach. It should be no matter what, even if it compromises Kavod Habriyot. The Gemara responds, Sha'ani hatav dichtiv lachoto. This is also an exception to the rule. The pasuk of lachoto tells us that this case of mitzvah is different than other cases of Kavod Habriyot. Challenges the Gemara, but ligmar mina. So what do you mean it's an exception? We never make exceptions. We make paradigms. This should be the paradigm that all mitzvot, even dioraita, even isur, not only derabanans, not only monetary law, even isur, like Korban Pesach and Brit Milah, should also have this principle that Kavod Habriyot overrides the mitzvah. So the Gemara responds, Sheval Tasa Shani. That here it's different because you're passively neglecting the mitzvah of Korban Pesach and Brit Milah. But you can't extend the paradigm beyond such a case. And if you're going to actively violate a mitzvah in the Torah like Shatnes, in such a case we maintain Rav's principle that the mitzvah comes first. Ein chochma v'ein tfuna v'ein eitzel neged Hashem. Nothing is greater than the mitzvah of the Torah. So what happens is through all these challenges and questions to Rav's principle, we've actually established three exceptions to Rav's principle, which is that rabbinic law, Kavod Habriyot, comes first. Biblical monetary law, Kavod Habriyot, comes first. Biblical isur, which is passive, Kavod Habriyot comes first. But if it's a biblical law, which is an active violation of a biblical law, which is isur, in such a case, the mitzvah comes first. And thus Rav is limited to that category, but it's still a true principle that the mitzvah overrides Kavod Habriyot. So thus, in conclusion, what we have is sometimes Kavod Habriyot wins over the mitzvah, sometimes the mitzvah wins over Kavod Habriyot. Both are incredibly important halachic principles, both the compliance with the commands of the Torah and also the upholding and the preservation of a person's human dignity